Breaking news, a partial verdict has been reached in the trial of 5 Proud Boys leaders stemming from the January 6th attack on the Capitol. Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio and 4 others were charged with seditious conspiracy for their role in an alleged plot to overturn the 2020 presidential election. I want to bring in Justice Department reporter Alex Mallon on the phone, along with ABC News contributor and former FBI agent Brad Garrett and ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer for more. Alex, let's start with a recap here. What are these men accused of?
Yeah, so Enrique Tarrio is the former chairman of the Proud Boys, that group, that far-right group that was accused of participating in a lot of violent rallies leading up and after the 2020 election. And they were charged as part of the January 6th riot with seditious conspiracy and a smattering of other felony charges and misdemeanor charges. This is Enrique Tarrio, 3 of his leading associates, and then a person that we would only describe as kind of a leading soldier of the Proud Boys on the ground that morning. You may recall those striking images of one of the Proud Boys breaking into the Capitol through a window using a stolen police riot shield. And so what these Proud Boys are essentially accused of, and what this case boils down to, is the government alleges that this group was essentially responsible for engaging in some of the most planned, organized assaults against law enforcement and organizing the entry into those barricades at the Capitol that resulted in all the violence at the Capitol on January 6th. You know, in contrast with this case between the Oath Keepers who were charged with seditious conspiracy, several of whom were convicted last year, this case is really related to the violence that we saw. I mean, the Oath Keepers, I would say, was more about the organization of the riot. This is more about all of the attacks on officers, the brutal break-in of the Capitol. And so I think that what it boils down to here, though, with Tarrio, the interesting point that I think the government had to prove, and it will be interesting to see what they determine, is that Tarrio was not present in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. But they allege that he led the Proud Boys. He was texting with them from Baltimore and essentially directing their movements, urging them not to leave the Capitol once they were in there. So it's a very big case for the Justice Department, and one of their largest remaining from the January 6th riot.
And Brian, we're hearing this could be a partial verdict. What would that mean if that's the case?
A partial verdict means a lot of different things depending on the situation. In a case like this, where you have 5 defendants, each one of them having 9 to 10 charges, it could mean that the jury has decided for 3 of the 5 defendants. They could have decided for 4 charges for one defendant, none for the others. The assortment could be any different variation, but usually what it means is they found some guilty charges and they haven't decided on others. But hypothetically, it could be innocent on some charges and undecided on others.
And we are now learning of a guilty verdict here. I want to go back to Alex for the latest on that. Alex?
Yeah, our Quinn Owen from the courthouse reports that Enrique Tarrio was convicted by the jury of that key charge of seditious conspiracy. Now, that charge alone carries up to 20 years in prison, and that is actually the biggest win for the government out of this, regardless of, the other potential verdicts that may come down. It was the leader, Tarrio, who was not there on January 6th, but they allege was involved in organizing the Proud Boys once they were at the Capitol and coordinating their movements. That was seen leading into the trial and during the trial as one of the more difficult tasks before the government, basically saying that a person who was not there led this seditious conspiracy against the U.S. government. And I think that's just a major victory for the government, and we're going to see as these other verdicts come in, what they've reached on the other leaders of the Proud Boys, but that is a key victory here for the Justice Department.
Brian, how significant is that to get a guilty verdict in a case like this when he wasn't even there on the scene?
I mean, that's a strong theory that the prosecution put forward, or the government put forward, and the defense obviously making the argument that how can you lead something when you're not even there? I think it's a major win for the government in the sense of their theory being proven before this jury. And as we see a partial victory here, I would expect that if someone can be convicted of leading a seditious conspiracy from outside in Baltimore, and not even in D.C., then those who are charged with him are likely to be convicted of similar charges, if not at least some of the lesser ones.
Brad, what's your take on how this investigation came together?
Various directions, fairly well. but not that easy to put together. That's why it's taken quite a bit of time between informants, wiretaps, previous information collected on the Proud Boys. All of this went together to come up with these most serious charges. And, you know, and to the point about was he there, was he not there, it's really irrelevant. In a conspiracy, for example, if you conspire to kill your wife and you hire somebody, you're just as guilty as the guy who pulls the trigger. So I don't know that that would be so difficult to prove, because they're going to have all this information that he organized it, that Enrique helped organize it, and also, more importantly, this was all about overthrowing the existing or the coming in government. And I think they did a great job of proving that.
Alex, what more are you hearing about what's happening in court?
Verdict form fill-in live. So right now, it looks as if it's so far almost a clean sweep for the government in terms of the seditious conspiracy charges. You have guilty of seditious conspiracy for Ethan Nordine. He's a leader of the Seattle wing of the Proud Boys. Zachary Rell, also guilty of seditious conspiracy. He's the leader of the Philadelphia Proud Boys. Joseph Biggs, guilty of seditious conspiracy. Again, all these, I mean, this is very significant for the government in terms of the fact that the seditious conspiracy charge was obviously the most significant, but they're also being found guilty on the other major felony charges that were brought against them. That includes conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. Obviously, that's the January 6th certification. Obstruction of an official proceeding. I mean, these guilty convictions alone carry potential decades, max of decades in prison. Again, we cannot understate, how big of a strike this is for the Justice Department against that Proud Boys extremist group. And again, I think that they were looking at this case and the Oath Keeper seditious conspiracy case as their two main avenues for bringing people to justice that they believe were on the ground involved in the January 6th Capitol riot and the planning that was leading up to it and the planning on that day. And so we're continuing to see these guilt verdicts come in. There are some not guilty verdicts, though. In terms of assaulting, resisting, or impeding officers, several of the defendants were charged with that, but have been found not guilty on that. Again, that includes Ethan Nordine, Zachary Rell. The key issue during the trial here was that they were actually not accused of direct assaults on law enforcement. It was whether they, helped incite other rioters around them, who they called the normies, to incite these attacks on law enforcement. So this is, I think what we saw during jury deliberations, which lasted about 6 days, and the judge in this case pointed out, is that this jury was very meticulous on how they were deliberating, kind of contrary to that narrative that has been put forward by pro-Trump allies that if you bring a case before a D.C. jury, you're going to get a clean sweep. I think that what this shows that this jury really deliberated and considered the allegations that were put forward by the government and whether they merited convictions here.
Brian, what kind of a precedent does a verdict like this set?
It lets people know that regardless of where you are, whether you're marching on the steps of the government, whether it be the Senate, the judicial branch, whatever branch you're on, or if you are miles away organizing such action, that you will be prosecuted and found guilty. I think to the credit of the jury, they were meticulous in this because the verdict sheet reflects what the facts pointed to, that they were not the soldiers on the ground, so to speak, throwing the punches and causing the damage, but they were the generals in the background organizing sedition. And I think this leaves a very clear message that even old charges can be strong against people who commit crimes against the government.
Now, Brian, they also or Alex, I suppose I could pose this question to you as well. One of the lawyers, or several of the lawyers, seem to be wanting to shift the blame to former President Trump, saying he was the one who incited this riot. It was his cues and his rage that these rioters were following. Could this impact this special counsel's investigation into President Trump's alleged role in trying to overturn the election, Alex?
Well, I mean, that's an interesting question. Again, this is a key victory in terms of, if you think about the conviction for Tarrio, that's the government saying that a person who wasn't at the Capitol on January 6th could have incited his followers and also engaged with them in order to carry out this attack on the government. If you think about what charges the special counsel might be considering for former President Trump and his allies, these are people that were not at the Capitol as well. but that, clearly the evidence put forward by like the January 6th committee last year showed that Trump incited his followers to the building and then deliberately decided not to call them off when they began attacking the halls of Congress. As for whether this directly impacts what Special Counsel Jack Smith is considering, I think that remains to be seen. I think with the appointment of Special Counsel Smith, Merrick Garland made sure that he was separating the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office's investigation of the violence on January 6th with the investigation to the efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And so when that separation happened, really you saw Special Counsel Smith leave with his own team of investigators who have been largely walled off from that other investigation into the rioters themselves and people like the Proud Boys leaders and the Oath Keepers leadership. So again, I think we are seeing so much activity in recent weeks with the testimony of former Vice President Mike Pence that suggests that investigation by Special Counsel Smith is in its very late stages, if not reaching a conclusion pretty imminently. And with this investigation now coming to a close after the Proud Boys trial went on for a grueling 4 months, it brings closure to a chapter, a very significant chapter in the government's overall massive, again, largest ever in criminal investigation into the events of January 6th.
So, Brad, let's go to you on that point, because this was the longest to date trial in the Justice Department's pursuit of Capitol rioters. They interviewed dozens of witnesses. They combed through hours and hours of video. How large was this investigation, and what happens next?
So it probably involved hundreds of agents, because think about what you have to prove to get to seditious conspiracy. It's one thing to see people pick up flagpoles, hit police officers, and charged with those direct events. But when you're talking about charging people with an organization, like the Proud Boys were alleged to have done, as well as the Oath Keepers, you really need a lot of information to support that. And so to do that, it takes a lot of manpower and a lot of technology pulling it together to convince a jury that, in fact, that is exactly what they did.
All right, Alex Mallon, Brian Buckmeyer, Brad Garrett, thank you all.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.